Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Open Skies Desert Voices, a special poetry reading celebrating Women's History Month on the last day. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am Julie Gannis. I'm the Curator of Engagement and Digital Initiatives at Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art. We are so excited to be hosting this event this evening with a couple of rock star poets that are local to Arizona. But before we get started, we do want to recognize that this institution lies on the unceded sacred land of the O'odham and Pipash peoples and their Huhugam and Pipanikor ancestors. We acknowledge and celebrate the Salt River Pima Maricopa communities, their elders both past and present, and generations to come. They are the original stewards of this land, and we are humbled to reside here. We honor the many diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this land that has sustained their people for centuries. They are an important part of our history, our present, and our future. I am super excited to be here this evening with Scottsdale's very own Poet Laureate, Lois Roma-Deeley, and Poet Laureate of Phoenix, Rosemary Dombrowski. Unfortunately, Patricia Murphy is unable to join us this evening, but Lois and Rosemary will each be reading original poems for approximately 20 minutes total each, alternating. Following the reading, we will do a Q&A with Lois and Rosemary. So if you do have any questions at any point throughout the event, please do submit it through the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. I just really, before we get started, want to take a moment to briefly introduce Lois and Rosemary, and then I will pass the mic on to them. So we'll start with Lois. So Lois Roma-Deeley's poetry collection, Like Water in the Palm of My Hand, which is forthcoming, is coming out in 2022. She gave us a sneak peek of it just the other day, so check it out. Her previous books include The Short List of Certainties, High Notes, northSight, and Rules of Hunger. Her poems are published nationally and internationally. Roma-Deeley is Associate Poetry Editor of Presence. She was named U.S. Professor of the Year by Carnegie Foundation in 2012, and she is the current and the newest Scottsdale Poet Laureate. Lois. And next we have Rosemary Dombrowski. She's the inaugural Poet Laureate of Phoenix and the founding editor of Rinky Dink Press. She's the recipient of an Arts Hero Award, a Great 48 Award, and a fellowship from the Academy of American Poets. In 2020, she founded Revisionary Arts, a nonprofit that facilitates therapeutic poetry workshops for vulnerable populations. She teaches courses at ASU Downtown, U of A Online, and is a lecturer for Arizona Humanities. So I will pass the mic on to Rosemary to get us started for the evening.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you first, Lois, Poet Laureate of Scottsdale, for inviting me to read with you for Women's History Month. It means so much when one of your feminist mentors invites you to read during Women's History Month. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And thank you, Julie and Smoga, for continuing to support the literary arts. And thank you, everyone, for attending and for celebrating women and poetry with us. I am going to open with an incendiary piece called Anti-Chlorinated Feminism. The gospel of the journey is realizing that eating is a political act, that the woodstock of the mind is everywhere on a tiny planet like ours, that the inventory of the body is equivalent to the trauma that comes from crop dust in our eyes, carcinogens in the crotches of our panties, Black women doing the math that put white men on the moon. And there are always more questions for consideration, like admitting that it's hard to tell who's shooting while we're praying with our eyes closed. Can everybody hear me okay? I feel like I should have asked that before I got started. For those of you who don't know me, it's probably several of you in the audience who do not. I'm the single mother of a son with nonverbal autism, congenital heart defects, intellectual disabilities, and a seizure disorder. So I've been writing about disability and medicine nearly his entire life. He's 23 now, and my work continues to be a means of survival, as well as a celebration of motherhood and womanhood and difference. So I'm going to read a few autism-inspired and medically inspired poems. This next poem was actually inspired by a Vladimir Nabokov story entitled Signs and Symbols, which is about a couple who has to institutionalize their son. And the reasons are never given in the story, but upon rereading the story a few years ago, I was stricken by how autistic the son seemed and how the story itself seemed to represent the world of autism. Cryptic, without definitive meaning, filled with symbols and signs. So that gives you all the context you'll need. The story Nabokov wrote about my autistic son. The birds with human feet and the ones in the bath, how one is always floating. The patches of skin where the acne appears. The art of being perceived as deranged. Obsessions like trains and deciphering clouds. Ripples counted in pools of water. Language distorted into nothing. The incoherence of patterns and pictures. The fear of public restrooms and the special school. The phobias that become a dense tangle of logically interacting illusions. The mothers who accept the loss of joy and the fathers who don't. The recurrent waves of pain. How the vulnerable meet their fate, are crushed or contained by the world. A child humming to himself in the corner. The beautiful weeds that can't hide from the farmer. This next sequence of short poems is from a new unpublished collection entitled Unfit Mother. And they're what I'd call medical poems, given that my son's birth was traumatic and he spent several weeks fighting for life in the NICU, which stands for Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. And I do use that abbreviation in one of the poems, so. Cemetery babies. We wrapped coffee cans in tinfoil for the babies, for the little girl crushed by the bus when she was 5. One by one, all of them dying on my father's side. Sudden death, maternal aneurysm, constricted canal. I never wanted to be part of the story. I refuse to write a memoir. I will never let them have us. Birthday. The windows are portals to another world. The ice blankets the freeway like the layers of bloody linens they stripped from my bed. The bathroom light is a beacon for a ship that can't make it to harbor. They bring me bacon that I refuse to eat. I realize there's nothing here to recognize. Not the face wrapped in pinstripes, not even the one in the mirror. Their eyes look like antiseptic. Their voices sound like my swollen womb, the taste of rot and no toothpaste. I am a stuck pig, a bleeding bitch, an unfit mother already. Day 2. I press the button 3 times, but no one comes to transfuse me. The UTI is imminent. The blood of my O is negative again, and the temperature is barely 40 degrees in Phoenix. I haven't prayed in the meditation garden, but when I do, that will be the Buddha that I see over and over again in my head. Day 3. The wheelchair in the bathroom is like the feeling you get when you're clinging to the precipice. Once, the Grand Canyon almost swallowed me whole. They say that the hole in his heart is the size of a dime. The surgeon is speaking another language. No contact, no running, no long distance, anything for life. I wonder who I will become without my legs. Today, I am the beeping monitor, the churning machine that's attached to my breasts. I see the face of sin in the NICU window. I pray to the saint of perpetual lactation, the wide-eyed mother of despair. Day 4. None of us knows which life the suffering will end in, so the priest pours a seashell over his forehead. My fingers are salty and damp. The eyes in the photo belong to someone else. They tell me no holding today. His veins ruptured, a patch of charred skin forming like a cancer on the top of his foot. Everything is sprouting from everywhere. Poison ivy and poison oak. I question my ability to survive in this wilderness. Day 5. The lights never go out and the monitors never stop bleeding. We rub our skin raw with surgical soap, suit up and keep our eyes to ourselves. On the first day, a nurse touched my shoulder and whispered, "We don't talk to other parents, and we don't say things about their babies." On the 5th day, they wheel him into surgery. I walk down the hall not knowing where to turn, just standing there for hours. Thank you.
I think I'm up next. I'd like to thank Julie and Smoka and Rosemary and everyone who has come tonight. It seems we need poetry more than ever in these times. It's the end of Women's History Month and the beginning of Poetry Month, so this is just a great time for this event. This first set, I'll be writing about some kind of personal poems, which I don't really do that much, but just the women in our lives. One of the questions I always ask my students is there such a thing as the female imagination? It's just something that kind of still fascinates me. Does the fact that we are female and live lives as females affect how we imagine? I don't really have an answer for that, but it's a great question. This first poem is from my first book, and the title is something my mother actually said to my father often. And the title is, "My mother says the neighbors think we're mafia." Chrome-tipped fins turn into the gravel driveway, shining rows of white teeth in dark olive faces of the men who wear pinstripe suits and handmade silk ties. I see foam Bel Air convertible flips its continental spare at the neighbors. The power windows roll down. "Hey, Luigi, paisan, come stai?" And there is too much Frank Sinatra blaring into the backyard of the hi-fi speakers my brother propped against the window screens. Too much baked ziti, peppers and sausage, stuffed shells, too many pretty women in red lipstick talking all at once, their pencil-thin brows arched as they stir the air with their hands. "The Americanos," they say, and we know it as a curse. Endless cannoli served with stories about stories, and what can you do? She was out of control. We had to take them in. Grudges held for 30 years. Money lent, lost, made, borrowed again. Respect will be paid. That's for my my mother, and all my aunts. This next poem is quite personal. My daughter is a nurse, and she works in the NICU, and she had quite an experience during the COVID time. And so this is a poem entitled That Nurse, My Daughter, for Melissa. If she's part of this right now, I know she's going to cry because she already read it to her. It's okay. She can cry. That Nurse, My Daughter, for Melissa. You're on the phone with me now as you stand in the hospital parking lot in your green scrubs, staring at the elevator doors, which will take you through the respiratory wing, past the nurses' stations, and down the long hallway as you greet coworkers and check messages for updates on your small patients, those sick babies in the NICU. You say you won't take your usual shortcut through the emergency ward. This you swear to me. And I believe you, even though I know how you are. You're working 16-hour shifts and more. Sleep eludes you. You don't eat. Protective gowns and surgical masks have not yet come. The virus is spreading through your ward. You tell me not to worry. But these are the words a mother should say, the ones I whispered to you in what feels like not so very long ago. With your curly Q pigtails and always flying high, and your favorite Wonder Woman underwear, which always fell slightly below your soft round belly. I remember the night you ran into our room, and climbing up and into the bed, you sobbed into my pillow. You were afraid of never waking from sleep and terrified you'd have no friends. There would be so many bills to pay, too much work to do. Then, cupping your face in both my hands, I looked into your sorrowing eyes, and I knew at once that love would make me say anything, tell any lie to stop you, my baby, from crying. This next poem is a long poem, and it is dedicated to my best friend. And that's all I'm going to say about it. It's called Outtakes from the Movie of My Life, and it's from the new book. Outtakes from the Movie of My Life for Carrie. 1. We're stuck on a raft lurching down Snake River, having come a long way just to find some peace. In this aerial shot of steep canyon walls and white water tumbling over jagged rocks, we're floating, dark specks of solitude and longing. 2. Suddenly, the movie jump cuts to the close-ups of us drinking from the same canteen. 3. But we both know the camera doesn't love us. Our faces swell and redden under the summer sun, filling each frame with too much sorrow. Now the lens refocuses itself. 4. And I crack a few jokes. You're my best friend, and so, throwing your head back, you laugh. 5. The birds flying high above our heads squawk out their warning. Now the image changes again. 6. And there I am running down the cellar steps. In the dark, we hear a frantic breathing. There's a homeless man crawling through your basement window. We're afraid. We're always afraid. 7. He's come to steal the scene, hungry for applause. The camera pans left to stacks of musty magazines, then right to a pile of mildewed books, finally resting on the thief, sitting right between them. A flashlight hangs from his mouth. 8. He writes on a yellow pad. The words glow iridescent in the damp air as if it were a script. 9. Of the party where we first met. In this tracking shot, my hair is long again. My hips are swaying inside that silk dress. Some kind of blue plays through the backyard speakers. Someone is swimming in the dark end of the pool. While I'm standing over on overseated lawn, a drink in one hand, joint in the other, you're on one knee scratching the throat of a stray cat. Strange voices surround us. In the middle of the crowd, loneliness is just another face among the rest. 10. Mine, the only one you'll recognize. 11. My high heels sink into the soft grass, staining the tips a soft green. Now you come behind me, surprise. 12. Whisper into my ear, what year is it? I can't remember. 13. Time fades in, fades out. And this last one from this set is from the new book as well. And this one's for my students. Well, it's for all of us, I think. It's called Quick Enough. Tonight, I'm driving Famous Guy from my college to Sky Harbor Airport. It's late, no one's on the road but the two of us, and the echo of the day when in every class, at every hour, he talked and talked about empty bookshelves and lazy readers and how time moves, why people don't change. Now I roll the window down, wishing it would finally rain. Then suddenly, as if it's a pop quiz, I'm stopped short by a red light and he asks, do you know the difference between quick and fast? His head bobbing from side to side like that plastic bulldog, that tiny spiked collar and all, stuck on the dashboard of my neighbor's car. When the light snaps green, I step hard on the gas. His glassy blue eyes look away. But I'm a magician now, tapping the top of the steering wheel like it's a silk hat. Presto, chango. Pulling out of the dark with a flash and a puff of white smoke, it's now I see you, now I don't. I'll just, thank you. I'll toss it back to Rosemary now.
Can I just say I loved that you referred to him as Famous Guy. Though I am going to ask you after the reading who it was. Loved it. Oh, thank you. That was fantastic, Lois. Thank you. All right, let me pull up my document again. Hopefully I'm unmuted and everybody can hear me. Okay. So this next sequence of poems is hopefully not going to be a downer. I think these are pretty charming. They're from a manuscript entitled Emily's Advice to Girls in the New Millennium. And they're a series of prose poems based on my personal translations, or what I like to call divinations, of Emily Dickinson's fascicles. For those of you who don't know what a fascicle is, that's the name that the scholars gave these things. They're little hand-bound books that Emily Dickinson self-curated during her most productive period. I don't know how many people know that they exist. They've been reassembled. They were disassembled and then reassembled over the past, 150 years. And after becoming something of a Dickinson scholar, I became really interested in these little books that she made herself, given that she wasn't widely published during her lifetime. And I also, after becoming a Dickinson scholar, stopped stressing out over solving all of her poetic riddles. And I just started making my own meaning. And what I now see and hear in all of Dickinson's poems is advice to other women. So I feel like these are apropos for our reading tonight. And the titles are not that important. They just represent the little booklet or fascicle that they were derived from. So I'm going to begin with the sixth one, the sixth translation. So it's called Sixthly, and it's sort of like the sixth piece of advice. Again, this is Emily's advice to girls in the new millennium. Sixthly, you are always emerging from your cocoon, watching the levels of water in the creek, barefooted and breezy. Drink the wine that grows the seeds of the world. Remember that the answers can be found in the woods, that the return of the birds is a sacrament, that commerce won't stop when you die, that when you lose a friend in childhood, it will tear you apart as many times as you're able to sew yourself back up again. Because life is chaos and the world is synesthesia, and someday you won't be able to tell morning from night. 12thly, try to find something else to get high on. Maybe the angels of summer or a choir of birds in the woods. The wind is a metaphor for a man's hands, your body like the curve of an urn, the wrapping of slender fingers. Don't use the word permission unless you really mean it. The act of a needle penetrating your flesh is the anguish of modern life, the misery of the memories that you can't bring back. Sometimes the order of the words doesn't make syntactical or linguistic sense, but there's a network of veins just under the surface, chirping like crickets. And that's the language that you may not be able to translate. So you just have to feel something. 13thly, once you understand progress, you become a machine ravaging the belly of the earth, a pool of grief settling beneath the tree. Read the history of rebellion until you understand what they were fighting, until you're less afraid than you were before. Remember that the best crucifix is the one that fits in your pocket like an invisible belief. When the voices keep taunting, remind yourself that you'll eventually get over it, become more eccentric, lie down and smell your body in a patch of dishonored grass. There's no such thing as magic, only a door to a room filled with birds, the sound of your humble heart beating until it stops and your soul's extinguished. 19thly, maybe you've always been a midnight girl in a daytime town. And maybe it's okay to love progress because of how quickly death takes it all away. And maybe it's okay to feel this way because of how hard it is for the brain to process, like how pleasure can make the wilderness come alive in your head. The only truth you need to know is that aging is the art of dying, that nearly every woman has secretly wanted to die and be resurrected as a dancer. Someday, when we're no longer girls, the morning will stop wanting us, and there will be no more eternal summer. And this is the last one, 28thly. There are a few things you need to be told. That you can grow a god in your head. That sometimes you're going to be the bird that stays too long, the one that gets trapped in the winter. But you'll eventually have to stop damning yourself. If you've never heard the parable of the dying tiger, the moral is this, that it's no one's fault because death is just a fact, like Jesus hanging like stalactites from the cross. You should always live in the moment because immortality is something that most of us can't afford. You don't really know what you're seeing when it disappears into the grass, but when you pray for something silly, you can be assured that no one's listening. That's my attempt at channeling Emily Dickinson. Thank you.
Thank you. Those were wonderful. We've had this conversation before privately, but I was at Emily Dickinson's house in her room, and the opposite her bed was two women writers, and that's who she saw every time she woke up and every time she went to bed. So I think you got it.
I read at the Dickinson house, but it was virtual because it was during the pandemic. And I've taken so many virtual tours of it because it means so much to me, but I've never been there in person. So I need to get to Amherst eventually.
It was, and I got to see her grave, and I left some there. Oh, it says my internet is unstable. I hope it's, can you hear me? Am I up?
It was, I think you were frozen for a minute.
Am I, okay, now okay, great. So now I'm going to read this poem, Apologizing for the Rain. It seems to me that women oftentimes apologize for absolutely everything. All the time. You see them in the supermarket, it's like, oh, I'm sorry. I know men do this too, but I think women do it as well. But there's a certain, I almost want to say a certain secret edge that women have and oftentimes conceal. Hopefully you'll hear it in this poem. This is from my second book, northSight. Apologizing for the rain. I'm sorry. The sky wouldn't listen to me. The bakery was closed. Sorry, I bumped into your shoulder, stepped on both your shoes. I'm sorry. The wind gets in your eyes. Some voices like to screech. Sorry, really, so sorry. I didn't think to cook you bacon. The lawn is still unmowed, and I inconsiderately was taken with an urge to let it go. Sorry, I use up all the air. Sorry, I take up too much space. I am sorry. Your mother didn't love you and your father was a jerk. So very sorry. That car ran through the red light. Sorry, that salesman knocked on your front door. Sorry, those kids chalked up your driveway. A nun came collecting for the poor. Sorry, you're still yawning, that the water isn't cold, that the world owes you a living, and I didn't even know. This next poem came out of an article I read in Time magazine about a woman in Egypt who for 43 years lived as a man. And she was married. And she said to the reporter that she'd rather eat dirt than get married again. So this poem was inspired by that article. Ghost Mother. Egyptian woman disguises herself as a man for 43 years. New York Times. It's in her voice. If you had asked me, I would have told you why I dressed in these pants and tunic, tied a green scarf around my close cropped hair, smoked cigarettes, spoke rough and low. Why I harvested crops, hauled cement, lifted bricks, cleaned the dust and dirt off of 1,000 shoes with nothing more to think about than how the day would end. My daughter survived and I was never beaten again. Now, walking through the maze of back alleys, I set my back against the wind. I'm a ghost mother. Memories float me through time to our small house, the one with 2 good chairs, an old radio humming on the kitchen shelf, my little girl playing on the bare floor. I'm a pearl shadow standing at the stove, smiling at pigeons simmering in the pot who seem to smile back. I filled their stomachs with rice and herbs, and now They bob up and down on a roiling sea of cinnamon and cloves. So here's a poem I've written for all of us. Poem in which I rescue you. I'm lifting you out of the here and now and opening the door to the other side of how good life is supposed to be. Now, I'm shoving you through, deadbolting lock, jamming lever, throwing away key. Even after all your pounding sill to sash, your fist begging bloody knocks, I won't let you back in. Then, while you're pushing and grunting, I'll kick the peephole, drive my heels into the floor, and after I wedge a chair underneath the knob, I'll slip a note underneath the thinnest crack. This is your new home. And I'll just end with these two. This poem comes from a manuscript I'm working on. It's I've got about half done. It's kind of like a chapbook. I'd like it to be a full-length collection at some point. At any rate, it's in the voice of body. There are no pronouns used at all. And if you've ever had an earache or a stomach ache, you know your body talks to you all the time or whatever. This explanation is a little bit more serious than that. For the last time, body explains dissociation. There's a bloody handprint on the front door of an old farmhouse. Snow drifts into the parlor, empty now except for an ant clinging to a red balloon which rises from the floor, floats over the hair sofa and the crooked tops of picture frames, finally resting in the cellar corner like a child's head in the crook of a parent's arm. Winter's eye is closing. All the windows are painted black. A candle sizzles into its own wax. The staircase groans. Of course it would. If there is any wonder, it's the mice eating through the kitchen pipes. A plane roars overhead, cuts a hole in the roof. Suddenly there's a turning, and it's not the iron key inside the metal lock, but the dead dressed in long silk shirts emerging from velvet flocked walls. Soon the clock will swallow its cuckoo, and the bird ghost will cluck and coo. It's not the leaving so much that hurts, but the passing through. And I will end with this poem that I wrote specifically for the city of Scottsdale, for the mayor's State of the City address, which was filmed and online. And my family said I didn't smile enough or at all. So I am smiling now for them. So, if wisdom could be dug out of the desert earth, then into our hopeful hands, our citizens would hold a harvest of revelations. But this pandemic age, bright and cold, rises as a full moon over McDowell Mountain as we sing into the shadows of too much sorrow. Neighbor, question God or the universe if you'd like. Shake your fist at the empty blue skies. There is only one answer, and it does not explain why. We've come the long way round, haven't we? To the place where the starflowers bloom and the owl's clover scatters purple along the switchbacks and canyon walls, echoes of the ages. The wild hawk flies over city lights, empty roads and dark buildings. Lizards scuttle through their dust. We strain to hear the meaning in the wind, rushing through the twisted, stubby trees. My friend, make whatever you will of this hated time. Just know, when we left that desolate place between grief and fear, the ancient petroglyphs cried out in wonder. Draw an X in the sand. Find the place on which to stand. Our past is a wish cut into hard stone. Never give up on each other. Thank you. I'm smiling. I am.
Thank you both so much for treating us to such a really fantastic evening of poems. I want to take this opportunity to see if anyone from the audience has a question. If you do, feel free to drop it in the chat or the Q&A. Otherwise, Lois and Rosemary, if you have any questions for one another while we wait for any other questions from the audience, that is also something that we can chat about briefly. We still have about 15 minutes, but oh, looks like we've got lots of really great feedback from the audience. Thank you all for being such a supportive audience. Bruce says warm and beautiful. Thank you so much, Bruce, for your wonderful comments for Rosemary and Lois. If we don't have any other, we'll give it like a minute for any other questions for Lois or Rosemary. Do either of you have anything that you are working on? I know, Lois, you're working on releasing your book of poems. Like anything else that either one of you want to shout out that you're working on for the future?
And next week, I'm giving a presentation for the Poetry Society of New Hampshire on ekphrasis, which I was, the work I've done with visual artists and musicians and poetry. So that's a lot of fun. And I'm hoping to have a Zoom book launch. I'm thinking maybe September, but people can certainly go to my website and see that. And I'm doing a lot of baking, unfortunately. I'm eating a lot of what I'm baking, but so yeah, just a bunch of stuff. I'm working on actually a new manuscript that I didn't even know a brand new one, as well as the body one, which is really difficult for me. It's not an easy thing to write an entire poem and not use he, she, just. My girlfriend said, I was telling her about it. She said, oh, that's so creepy. I thought it was cool, but she thinks it's creepy. So that's what I'm doing. Rosemary, what are you doing?
I was actually going to put a link in the chat room too, just in case anybody wanted to come to anything. I'm primarily a lecturer, and I run a cat colony, obviously. But tomorrow I'm giving a talk at the medical school, which is virtual and anyone can attend. And it is about using Walt Whitman as a guide to healthcare equity. So it's about achieving healthcare equity through poetry is really what it's about. So it doesn't just reside in the Walt Whitman-esque philosophy. So I'm actually going to give tips, people in the healthcare profession, as to how they can incorporate poetry into their lives and their patients' lives in an attempt to be more equitable in patient care. And then a week from tomorrow, I'm on the TED stage, also talking about poetry, and I will be giving a talk called The Medicinal Power of Poetry. And I don't know when the video will be uploaded to the TED channel, but I'm very excited about both of those. And I think I have a talk Monday too, also on the medicinal value of poetry. So a lot of lectures. I'm a medical humanist. So my work resides at the intersection of medicine and the humanities. I'm a medical poet and I run a therapeutic poetry nonprofit. So it's a strange and beautiful discipline to be in right now. I think 5 years ago, no one knew what it was, and people probably still don't today, but it's a wonderful space to be in because healthcare is very appreciative of humanists right now. So, and I know that they need us, and I'm ready to scaffold. I'm ready to scaffold. So I love the work. I really do. I love it so much. So thank you, everybody.
We do have one question.
It's one of my students.
So either one of you or both of you, it would be great if you could throw in your 2 cents. Do you have anything specific that helps you in your writing, whether it be an inspiration to write or puts you in the right headspace?
Lois, you want to take it? You take it first.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, a number of things. For me, reading other poets and kind of gets me going. Talking with other poets gets me going.
Yeah.
I don't write very quickly. I'm a very slow writer, very, very slow. And I'm always amazed when other people can do, and they write really well, but I'm not that. So I find it difficult sometimes to wedge myself into that poetic space. I do try to at least pay attention to the poetry, and that includes the business side of it in the morning, because I don't sleep well, so I get up like at 5. So I'm doing stuff from like 5 to 8 a lot. I do love, though, to be in the middle of a book. That's my most favorite place to be, because the poems start talking to each other, and then I'm writing stuff that I'm answering. The poems are asking questions I didn't even know I asked. So that's the best place to be. So yeah, there's that. And people don't oftentimes talk about this, but sometimes you just have to walk away from it.
Yeah.
You have to be fallow. You have to, just watch bad TV and date, and,
or good TV.
just like, watch my basil grow. I don't know. Just because the best piece of advice I got, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from my MFA advisor, Rita Dove. And she said, right? No, I mean, it was like, it was brilliant. And I remember her, well, she said 2 things to me. One is, I ran up to her one day and she was running down, the middle of ASU Mall. This is 1,000 years ago.
She eventually became Poet Laureate of the United States, for those of you who don't know that.
Right. And won every single award that there is.
She's a big deal.
But back then she was just like my friend.
She was just a professor.
So I ran up to her and I said, Rita, and she had books, you know how it is when you're teaching, and papers all over the place. And I said to her, I'm not writing like other people. And she just looked at me and said, good. And she walked away.
Who cares?
The best piece of advice she gave me, she said, the poetry is in the living.
Yep.
I wish people would tattoo that to their body. The poetry is in the living. And
yes,
not the other way around. So that's what
you know what? I will volunteer to tattoo that on my body. I'm going to write it down right now. Rita Dove quote that I got almost straight from Rita Dove's mouth. The poetry is in the living. I was going to say, it's pretty obvious that my poetry is lived experience. Yeah. So the other thing, I think the 2 things that gestate the most poetry for me are lived experience and just reflecting on that lived experience. And maybe my students already know this about me. I'm a big field note taker. So whenever I'm in medical environments with my son, in order to keep myself calm, I just take notes. I just take notes in my phone. And then later that becomes something, or it becomes many things, or it becomes the beginning of something that turns into a whole collection. So I'm a big note taker. I'm into field notes. So when I'm living life, I'm also observing, and I'm oftentimes writing, or I'm dictating something into my phone. I especially do that in medical environments, because I love to catch everything that clinicians say, everything, and try to make sense of it later, and then recast it into my own version of the story. And then the second thing I love to do is research, if that wasn't obvious with my Dickinson intro. I love to research. And so I won't just read the poetry, I'll read everything. And that oftentimes is the most inspiring thing for me outside of my own lived experiences, is the research, the diving really deep into someone else's biography, into, critical works about that individual. And it doesn't have to be another poet. It could be any kind of figure at all. I'm just going to say something really quickly about disabled writers participating. My nonprofit works with a lot of different organizations that support people with disabilities. So, we work with the Hearing Loss Association of America. We work with recent parolees. We work with caregivers who are all caregiving, caring for people with disabilities. We have not we have not sort of dipped our toes into, like, let's say, the autism community. And I think the primary reason why I have not is because language is such a barrier for so many people with disabilities like autism, that I wouldn't maybe choose to use poetry in that environment, because it might be more frustrating, or they just may not have the language to, use poetry in a therapeutic way. But, certainly the Epilepsy Association has been recommended to me, and that's something that I was planning on looking into, since my son has a seizure disorder. In fact, Barrow, his doctor at Barrow Neurological, suggested that I work with the Epilepsy Association, so I may do that. But we have open to the community workshops that are open to everyone, and then when populations that serve, or when nonprofits that serve people with disabilities reach out to us, we're always able to find a facilitator who's really eager to work with that population and do the research, and the reading necessary to work with that population, because we like to bring in poems that speak to the population that we're working with. So I work with the formerly incarcerated, and I use a lot of the poetry of the formerly incarcerated. I'm about to start working with veterans, so I'm going to be working with a lot of poetry written by veterans. So I think it's always important to, incorporate, disability voices, medicalized voices in the appropriate spaces, because that's what's going to speak most to that community, right? And there is quite a body of disability poetry, and there's quite a body of cancer poetry, and there's quite a body of poetry that deals with just about every medical condition you could imagine. So that's a lot of what I recommend to providers. If you can't find the language to talk to your patients, guess what? There's a collection of poetry that can help you with that, because that's what speaks to the human side of patients, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty easy fix in healthcare. I'm always saying, why can't oncologists just put these cancer collections in their waiting rooms? It's okay if you don't have the right words for your patient at the moment of diagnosis, but it would be nice for you to hand them a book or a poem that maybe does have the right words for them and makes them feel like they're part of a community. So
Yeah, I always tell my students the quote from Henry James, that a writer is one on whom nothing is lost. And I think you talked about research, but I think research could be just simply really observing the world. There's like, I think there's like dramas going on. I mean, go to the supermarket. I always said this to my students. How many of you have been in the supermarket and there's somebody in front of you and they've got like a gallon of gin and it's like 7 o'clock in the morning and you're judging them. You're making up stories, and
you are.
That, or the couple that are like, I mean, the world is a wondrous place.
It is.
I mean, poetry, I say, doesn't always give you the answers, but it does teach you to pay attention.
Yes.
It does teach you to pay attention, and I think that that's what it means to be kind of, fully human.
That's right. Yeah. I think it's all born out of field work. That's what you're saying, Lois. Yeah. I mean, poets are anthropologists, they're these sort of great observers of people and life in general. And I think we just translate that into poetry because that's what feels good to us. I guess we could write research if we wanted to. I don't really want to. So I prefer to translate everything into poetry. So
also, I think I don't know about you, but I like the quote from Frost, who said, poetry is a momentary stay against confusion, because for me, I'm confused all the time. So kind of like, okay, I always say, that's what they'll put on my tombstone. She was very confused. So it helps to like, well, what about this? That's what I meant about sometimes a poem I'm writing is asking a question I didn't even know I had, and that's a wonderful thing. But you have to kind of allow for serendipity, that something is going to come into the process, and that's not an easy thing to do. That sounds very easy, but that actually takes a great deal, I think, of practice, kind of like meditation. But anyway, so that's all, and we're probably close to our time here. Thank you, Julie, for putting this all together, and my friend Rosemary.
Thank you so much. Paisana, thank you so much.
Seeing you in such
That feminist mama, thank you so much. No, this was beautiful. What a great way to close out. Like you said, Women's History Month and kick off National Poetry Month. And it's also Autism Awareness Month. So
shout out for everybody who did show up.
thank you,
Really,
everyone.
thank you
Yes,
so much. I know I can see in the chat we have several writers, several wonderful writers that I know, and some I hope to know in the future. So thank you so much for contributing to making the culture of our time. And I think that's one of the most important things we could do. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you all. Thank you, Lois and Rosemary. This, like everyone said, this was just a wonderful treat. What a fantastic high note to end this Women's History Month and move on into the beginning of Poetry Month. I thank you both for taking the time to join us this evening, and for everyone watching, thank you for your time. And we hope to see you at future events, whether they're virtual or in person at SMOCA. So always stay tuned to our website, smoca.org, or follow us on Instagram. And we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you again. Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming, friends. Bruce, AJ, thank you so much.
Bye-bye now.